All right, so hi everyone. If you weren't here this morning, I'm Linda Mason. I'm Dean of the Grad School. And I do this talk specifically because there's always a lot of confusion about employment and what does that mean. And some students, especially we have our international students who may never have worked in the States. So what does that mean to be an employee at an institution of higher ed? And what are the benefits stuff, which I'm not going to talk about specific benefits. That's a whole nother conversation that we have. But it's more about how do you balance all the things that you have to do as a graduate student and as a graduate student employee. So I get life is very complicated, and we are all, as individuals, really complicated people. And so you have lots of different identities. And in grad school, you're adding another sort of identity, especially if you're a grad student employee, about what does that mean to be an employee of the institution. So you're a student, you may be married, you may have kids, you may be a TA, you may be an RA, you may be a GA, all those terms that we throw around, and you have a life. And so how do you balance all of those roles so that you're successful in each of them? And sometimes it's a very learning opportunity to figure out how do I do all of this when I'm not quite sure what the role is. And the other part is that role differs for each individual. The roles that you have, even if you're a TA, there are many different kinds of TAs out there, teaching assistantships. And if you're an RA, how that functions depends on who your major professor is or who you're employed through as that RA. So we'll kind of hit all of those things, but we're going to try to make it so that it makes sense to you, or at least gives you a platform to launch from. So, first of all, always remember you're a grad student first. Your goal here is to get from admissions here to graduation at the end successfully. And that's the first role that you have to have in place. And I understand that if you're taking on an assistantship role, in whatever form that may be, that complicates your life and sometimes can be overwhelming part of your life, depending on what your expectations are. But you are a grad student first, and so as you start to prioritize how you spend your time and what you do, that's the first goal that you've got to meet to be successful. Because if you don't meet that one, the other one goes by the wayside. Then you have that employee, right, that researcher. So the students that are employees through the university, you cannot be in a professional program and you cannot be in a fully online program. So you have to be in a thesis program or a dissertation program. You could get other types of employment, but to be on that assistantship, we only offer that to our full-time students that are in our regular residential program. You can't be in a fully online program and be on an assistantship. Then the employee part is the research assistantship, which means you're getting paid, most of them are half-time appointments, 20 hours a week to conduct research. We'll get to that in a second. 20 hours a week for teaching. That could be, you may be a full instructor in the class and you're in charge of everything that happens in that classroom, down to 20 hours a week for grading. Right? And then we have an appointment called a GA, which is slightly different because the tax differential is different when you're a GA versus an RA, TA. The way your taxes are put on you to the federal government and the state government. A GA would be working in an area to be like, you might be working on web page development, or you might be working on as a receptionist or something like that. It's a general administrative position within the university. You have family obligations. You may have significant others, whatever that may be, and that you've got to deal with balancing all of that. And of course, you're human. You need to have some other parts of your life that you're giving it with that, what we talked about this morning, giving of community service. So as you balance all of those, these are how I would prioritize. your time, and then you mix and match how that goes, right? Because you got to keep your family happy. You know, if you're married and you got kids, you can't be the student all the time. You got to keep your family happy on that part. So, how does compensation work? Typically, most students are on a half-time. The remainder might be on a quarter-time. So you'll see a 0.5 FTE. That means a full-time equivalent is our lingo of where that fits in. So most students are hired at a half-time FTE, so 0.5 FTE, which is equivalent to 20 hours a week of employment on average, all right? We had a salary task force about a year ago. Well, for 3 years, we've been working on increasing what our minimum stipends is. They typically go up what our minimum stipend that's published, typically go up on whatever the staff get as a raise. So typically those in the past few years have been 3 to 4%, and then we will up that grad school minimum through HR up 3 to 4% each year. But we wanted to do a really significant change the past couple of years as cost of living has changed and all of that. And so we were able to get through the university. We did a couple of years of task forcing, a lot of in-depth studies, a lot of peer comparison, et cetera. And we're able to get $11 million from the university to up stipends significantly. So as you can see the difference here, so it went from $15,912 to $1,880 if you're on an academic year appointment. That means fall and spring. And it went up to $24,124 if you're a fiscal year employee, which means you're employed fall, spring, and summer. All right? So those are what our stated minimums are. Our grad students, many of them earn way above that. So we may have students that go from the minimum stipend, depending on the discipline, up, $30,000, $40,000. And it really based on just like employment anywhere, just like faculty salaries. We hired almost 300 new faculty are coming into Purdue in the fall. Their salaries are all over the board, depending on what their discipline is. So certain disciplines make more to be competitive on what's out there, and so that's the same way with grad salaries. So departments will determine what that competitive nature is and what they have to do to compete to get that. Some may pay differently based on master's versus PhD. Some may say after your PhD and you pass your qualifying exams, you get a bump. There's all different models out there. But this is the stated minimum, and we do an audit every year to determine, to make sure that after the salaries have locked down in the semester after a couple of weeks, we make sure that everybody is making at the minimum. Nobody is allowed to pay under that, so that everyone's at that. But that's what you should be getting. And we'll talk about some statements that you're going to get so that you can verify that. You are what we call an exempt employee. You are not an hourly employee. So if you go work at a retail store here, or some of our employees, some of, say, the administrative assistants or the secretaries or the counselors, some of those positions are what we call non-exempt versus exempt. A non-exempt person is like a person who punches a clock. You're supposed to be here 8 to 12, 1 to 5, right? You're paid by the hour. If they work overtime, they get time and a half. Graduate assistants are considered exempt employees, like faculty are, that you are not paid based on the hours you work, but you're paid on a salary basis, that this is what you get for those. So when we say you're employed for 20 hours a week, that's a plus minus average, right? So if you're a grader and you're grading quizzes, there are some weeks where the quizzes are going to be light. And you can get through a quiz, 10 questions, boom, 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 you're done. On the week that there's a midterm, you may have extra hours because it takes longer to grade, 50, long exams than it does to grade those. So it's the average. What I would say is that you've got to be aware that if it's consistently over that, you need to go back to your supervisor and say, man, either I'm really inefficient in doing what my job is, or I need help to figure this out because I'm consistently over the hours that I'm being paid to do. So, especially with the TA, it's much easier to define what your hours because your work is really well defined as a TA, all right? But you're not paid by the hours. You're not expected to clock in when I start grading and punch out when I stop grading, and then you turn in a time card. You're given that expectation that somehow during each week you're putting in 20 hours and they write the check for 20 hours every week, all right? So that's how it's going in and out of the HR system. And you are not being paid to do your academic work. All right, as I mentioned this morning, about 70% of our students that are eligible for being on an assistantship are in some way, shape, or form compensated for employment while they're here. Another 30% of those students are paying full tuition, $35,000 a year. They're paying their cost of living, et cetera, all of that. And so they're not getting paid for their academic work, and neither are you. You're getting a degree, and that's your academic commitment of coming here. And so your work is related to your work, and your academic work is related to your degree. And so in teaching, it's very obvious how you separate that out. Research, it gets a little bit more complicated, but the hours, your contract is specifying what you're supposed to be doing, and that 20 hours is related to your teaching or some research compensation. And we're not paying the hours that you go to class and all that. That's why it's 20 hours a week instead of 40 or 60 or whatever you might have to put in to get through graduate school, right? So that's where that compensation model comes in. The benefit of being on a university assistantship is that you no longer pay that $35,000 out-of-state tuition cost that comes in. At Purdue, the model is somebody does pay your tuition. All right, we don't just write off tuition. So when you are a TA, that's most likely coming from what we would call general funds, university-supported funds that are charged to a university account. And that's about an $11,000 fee, a little under $11,000, the fee remit rate, that your boss pays that tuition to the university to cover those costs of the tuition and the fees, et cetera, related to many of those fees. If you are on an RA, you're probably on a grant or a federal supported system in some way, shape, or form, and that is paying that tuition to the university. So the university is getting compensated for your cost of attendance, essentially. Or if you're on a grad student, grad school assistantship, it may be a Ross or an Andrews or a Billsland. We have a lot of those that we give out to the colleges that they distribute. Again, I'm paying that tuition bill. I get a bill, I write the check, I transfer the money from my accounts to the university to cover your tuition. So you're not having to pay for it, and I'm luckily, because you're an employee of the institution at that point, I'm not paying $35,000 a year. I get a little bargain on each of those. So you're getting that. The university subsidizes the cost of your medical insurance. You know, if you live in the United States long enough, especially for our international students, we don't have socialized medicine here. Healthcare is very expensive here in the United States. Somebody always pays when you get out and have a job outside of here. You'll find how much you pay to have medical insurance, and certainly, you know, when I had kids, all of a sudden my medical insurance premiums went up because I got to cover a whole family now. The university subsidizes the cost of that insurance to you as an employee. And that part, because it's an employee benefit, we would cover part of that insurance benefit for you. And matter of fact, grad students get more covered than standard employees, like my portion that the university pays for me. Graduate students get a little bit more coverage on that. And that value is about, for a half-time assistantship, about $1,600 that the university puts towards your medical costs, so you don't have to pay that. There are benefits. You also, even though you're an employee of an institution, you're also a student, and so you can use PUSH facilities, which is the University Health Center. So you get the advantage of doing that. Other employees can't use PUSH in that way, but you as a student can. And of course, the insurance. Now, our insurance went up. I mean, we renegotiated insurance this year. We got a surprise bill that the company that we were using was going to go up the premiums 25%, which was not a good thing at all. And so we went into, well, we didn't, HR went into panic mode and were able to get other companies to bid. And so if you were around or saw on some of that, we had to go through and reshift the companies that we're working with, and we're still working through all of that, because normally we negotiate contracts a year in advance, and this happened in probably a matter of 6 weeks. So there's a new company that is covering our health insurance for our students, and they were generous enough to be able to, we've been working out a lot of deals back and forth, and so because all the doctors that you would visit, so here you have in-network and out-of-network. If you haven't been in the US, we have something called in-network and out-of-network providers. So if you're in the network, they negotiated a better price with the company than people who are out-of-network, and you pay full cost or much higher cost for them. Because this all happened so quick, there was no time to negotiate with all the companies that we deal with locally for physicians. And if you weren't aware, the grad school is a 4-campus graduate school. So each of your colleges are only based on this campus, but the graduate school, I'm the dean over 4 campuses. So all our benefits and stuff are negotiated for all the campuses. So anyway, we had to renegotiate that, and United Healthcare is going to accept everything that's out of network normally in network for the first year, until we can get all the doctors and everybody renegotiating contracts. So if it does happen and you get an out-of-network bill, then it comes in and they're going to have to recode things, and they'll get it worked out. So this year's a little bit wonky. Hopefully it won't be that way next year. Usually it's much smoother transition for everybody. But anyway, that was one of the things that they are working on, and we're still working out. There was a deal with some of the prescriptions to get it worked out, but you can get all your prescriptions filled at push for $10 copay or no copay on some of the things. So anyway, we're still working out some of that, and we apologize for that with HR, but it's getting figured out. And so if there are questions, HR has been pretty good about trying to work through all the weird things that are happening associated with that. But that is a benefit that you get as an employee. So a lot of confusion if you've not worked in the academy about what an AY versus an FY appointment is and how they're set up. So let's go over the details depending on what your contract is. If you are AY, that means you have an assistantship for fall and spring, but you are not on an assistantship for the summer. That means you are in vacation status when the university is not operational. Most of our faculty are AY faculty. When I was hired back in 1991, I was the last faculty hired under fiscal year status. So since then, almost all our faculty are AY status. So they don't get vacation days either, I mean, the way the employee works, unless they have an additional appointment in the summer. Then they might be a joint mix between FY and AY, but very few faculty are FY or AY, so they're going to be in the same boat as you, which means their contract starts the week before classes, which is typically what graduate students who are in AY, you start the week before classes. When we're closed on fall break, which is in October, forget the exact week, there's a Monday, Tuesday where we're closed. Those are days that you're on vacation, right? When the university, after grades are turned in, which is 5 o'clock on the Tuesday after finals week, then you're on vacation from there until the university reopens in January, all right? You don't accumulate vacation days like you might at another job where every month you get so many hours accumulated to vacation and sign off on vacation. So if you are an AY, you're to be at work when the university is open. And when the university, if there's a federal holiday, like Labor Day is a federal holiday, and we don't work on Monday of Labor Day in September, you guys are off. You don't have to take a vacation day. That's the day you're technically off. All right? So Labor Day, fall break, Thanksgiving, Martin Luther King Day, that's in January. Spring break, that week that we're closed for spring break, those are the dates that you're off. If you are on an RA with an AY, that's a negotiation also that you would talk with your boss about, right? If you're in the middle of an experiment and you set it up and it runs on Thanksgiving Day, you can't walk away from your experiment, right? So there's things like if you're an AY employee and you're thinking about how you're setting up an experiment, you kind of want to look at that calendar as just time things out. And if you want to be gone, you don't set something up that's going to be running on a day that you're supposed to be working, and then you talk with your boss about how that's going to work. But that's how those contracts are run. All right? If you're a fiscal year employee, which means you are a student that was given an RA, a TA, or a GA for the entire year, so your contract usually runs from August 15th all the way till the following year of August 14th, or however that day falls on a Monday through a Friday. You're benefit eligible. You get leave, so you accumulate leave days. You can't take any employee, like when I came, you can't take vacation for so many days. You have to work like 30 days before you're eligible to take a vacation day. You're not allowed to come in and start taking vacation days right away. It starts to accrue. You get so many days a year. Eventually, after you work your year, you'll have then 22 every year, and they accumulate as you accrue through your time, and you can accrue up to 22, so if you wanted to take 3 weeks off. So when the university is closed on a legal holiday, you get that as a vacation day. You don't have to take like Labor Day off as a vacation day. The university, the president usually signs off on days between Christmas and New Year's, and we shut down, so you don't have to use vacation days to take Christmas Day to New Year's Day off, which is like, yay, we all love that when the president does that. But any other time you want to take a day off, you need to fill out a vacation form and submit that and use one of your accrued days. And you can see in your employee on the web, you can see how many days you've accrued and where you are. So you can just work it out. As we said, you work those things out. So use those days if you have. This is the numbers on the funding that we talked about this morning. Some of you that are on true fellowships, do we have anyone here that's listed as a true fellow? All right. So, huh? Okay, let me get to this. So if you're on a true fellowship, there are fellowships that are administered as assistantships. And if we administer you as an assistantship, then you get the assistantship benefits. If you're on a true fellowship, like an NSF fellow or a Fulbright fellow, then your contract is with your granting agency and not with the university, and so assistantships aren't really the word unless we are able to convert it as a fellowship administered as assistantship, so they think you're an employee, but your job is to do whatever your fellowship was. Okay, yeah, what's your question?
I was just going to ask, so for the academic year section in the previous slide,
Yeah.
The day that grades are due through 7 days prior to the start of the spring semester, just generally, how many days is that?
Depends on the semester, like the break between spring and fall, of course, is the full summer. For fall, we usually end about the second week in December, and we go through, we don't start back up until like the 8th or 9th of January. So there's a gap in between there that's a little bit longer. So that a lot of students who are international and want to travel home, that's a good time to do it because you've got a longer gap of time to be able to do that compared to other gaps if you didn't want to do it during the summer. So know if your letter says true fellowship or fellowship administered as assistantship, that'll change how you're processed in the system, okay? So we do have a Grad Student's Bill of Rights. It was something that Purdue Grad Student government put through several years ago. The president at the time put that through. You can find that on the web. It went through and was signed off by both the graduate school and the university senate. It lists all the responsibilities that we would say that the expectations that the university expects of a student and what the students expect of the university. And so it's a good way that you can kind of go back and check some of the things if you're questioning about what's going on. Just Google Purdue Grad Student Bill of Rights. It's It's posted on the web. It's posted on our grad school page. And the meaning of that is to empower. So many students may be new to the graduate world. They may be new to what that means. If they're from an international student, higher ed here is very different than higher ed in many other countries. And so understanding that relationship, this is a good read for you to start getting an understanding of how graduate students are perceived. And this isn't just for students as employees. This is a Graduate Student Bill of Rights for all students, of what your expectations are and what our expectations of us are for you back. Now, I want to go through a little bit on your offer letter so that if you're on an assistantship, you can go back and read this. And then I'll show you something that you should be getting in the mail fairly soon. So it should state, we have templates for these, so most departments use them. Occasionally faculty go rogue and they send out their own letter. And we're like, oh my gosh, you can't do that. So hopefully you've got a letter that was an official letter from your department that was following the template that we give them to follow this out. It should state what your FTE is. If you're quarter time, half time, some students are 3/4 times. International can't be more than a half time. Quarter time, then 3/4 time, and then full time. There are a very handful of students, grad students, that have a 100% FTE appointment. Some of those may be employees that are going back to school or something. But anyway, an FTE, all right? And it will tell you what type of assistantship, a GA, graduate assistantship, teaching assistantship, or research. It should be stated in your letter so you understand what you're accepting, what that job means, all right? And what year, assuming you get admitted, which you all now are at this point, you've been admitted, you're here, so we know that you got the offer and you followed through with everything that you needed to do. The contingency of that employment is based on satisfactory progress towards your degree. If you stop making progress toward the degree, you can lose your assistantship. Because the idea being, if we can't balance work and school, we want you to focus on school. And I know sometimes that would be like, well, but then how am I going to pay for school if I can't be in school? Right? So the contingency of having a student-employee thing is that you're making satisfactory progress towards your degree. So we want to make sure you do that. And usually that's maintaining a GPA of 3.0 toward your classes that you're doing, your regular classes that you're taking. It can also be contingent upon your research credit hours, which I'll talk about those. So satisfactory performance. You should get a supervisor. Sometimes they don't assign that till like this week. So you may have to, if you didn't come that in your letter, they just hire a bunch of people and then they start assigning them to a certain professor that you have. So a teaching, who may be your teaching supervisor. Some departments don't assign you like a major professor your first semester. You enter as a cohort and then you get assigned somebody. So somebody will ask. You wouldn't have an assistantship, but in those cases they take the similar class. In those cases they take the similar classes, but you guys could all take, like we have students in my program who get their PhD and take no coursework. They have all the coursework they need, and they're just taking research credit. So it's really variable. But anyway, you're going to do something, and it should tell you about what those hours are, and if it hasn't been worked out, sometimes that has to be worked out, like they don't know quite what, if you're going to teach, they don't know what section you're going to teach until you get here, and now you're told, okay, your section is Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 3 o'clock or whatever, okay? But somehow that's going to be laid out, and as you get here, you'll get more information. But that's the first requirement of what's in there. Second of all, it may or may not have, it should have, but not all the templates do this, is to give you what your weekly salary is. Several years ago, we went from a monthly pay scale to a biweekly. It made it easier for grad students to budget their money in a way, and so you get paid every 2 weeks. So you can be aware of what that is and what the annual salary is. something to note, if you're on an AY appointment, the pay may vary 1 or 2 of the weeks over the Christmas break, okay? So you can go in and you'll get a letter that will give you a link, and you can go look at every paycheck you should get throughout the year, what the payday is. So you work 2 weeks, and then the 3rd week you get paid, because they have to process that you actually work those 2 weeks, and then the 3rd week you get paid. And so you can go into that website and actually see what all your paychecks are going to be, and how it kind of gets messed up over the holidays a little bit, because you're not really in work status. Your contract ended, your new contract hasn't began. If you're in FY, fiscal year, you're being paid all of those, and unless you're filling out vacation time, you're not losing any pay. And so your paychecks are more regular. But it should be in there, and your period in there. It'll tell you what your grad staff fee is. Generally, most grad students at Purdue pay less than $300 of your general fees. Part of that is your student activity fees, and there's a few others in there that are covered. The rest of the fees are picked up by that fee remit that's covered on your assistantship. Your boss is paying that. So that less than $300, unless you're in a program in like engineering or Cranert business, they have what's called differential fees. And some of those are huge. They may be thousands of dollars depending on what your discipline is. So, but it would have stated what your fees are and what you have to pay. The date of your appointment most starts on Monday, this past Monday, and we'll go through whatever the semester is, okay? And so they'll click and they'll put those 2 dates in there. So they'll have the pay periods that are in there. If you're on fiscal year, it'll probably go from August 15th through August 14th of the following year and get renewed, okay? So how do you balance, this is the hard one, right? How do you balance all of this? Your schedule, if you're a TA, could change every semester. So you've got to be prepared for that. And if you're doing research, be aware that your teaching assignment could change, and so you want to know what that new teaching assignment as soon as you can, so you can plan experiments that you want to do. Some of you will TA in a department different than where you are. So you may be an engineering student, and you didn't get an offer from engineering, but you applied and got a TA-ship in the College of Science in biology. So students get employed in colleges outside of where their discipline is, and so you need to understand what your responsibilities are to that college as an employee versus your responsibilities to your home department as a student. And the calendars may not match up, right, because of what your expectations are on a TAR. Most RAs are within the department that your discipline is. You're getting employed as a research assistant in that department. Okay. So you may have an office. Not all graduate students have offices. It just depends on what program you're in. Some have bulk areas. A lot of them are going to rotational docking stations. So as we work more remotely and students move back and forth, there may be areas in your department where they have just like mass areas where people come to work, and then you can go into a private cubby and work if you need to, but there may not be. Some do it in lockers, where they have lockers where you can stick stuff for the day, and then they have workstations that you can come and go. You got to find that out in your department because it's all varied in there. Some may be in labs. Not many of our students, but some, depending on where they are, we tend not to like to have, depending on what you do in your lab, your office in your lab, because spending all the hours in there, and then depending on what chemicals could be going on in there, it may not be a safe environment for you to be sitting around 24. So then they try to put you in someplace else that's adjacent to that you can get into. But that just depends on where you're working. Some of our students, their work is not done on this campus at all. And you'll have an opportunity to do what we call remote work. You have an opportunity to do research off campus, research in absentia, where you may go work for a company and do research there, or you may have a field site. If you're doing, archaeology and you're studying, Egyptian mummies, your research isn't going to be here. Your research is going to be in Egypt, doing the work there. And so you may not have any centralized location here that you're doing research around. It just is going to depend on your discipline and what the nature of your work is. It may be all library work, right? So you don't need a laboratory, all right? So for a researcher, you know, the bike's on fire, you're having to balance all of this. It gets really confusing. And how you define what your research hours are versus your academic research. And this is where it gets the most messy for students. So in my department, for example, all our students, we don't take on students unless we can fund them. We have a small department. Those students, most of them, like my students, are on an RA, and their research assistantship is to do their dissertation work. All right? If I need help doing something else, then they have an understanding, oh, you got to go help me do this in the field today. I need a little bit of help here, or whatever. I mean, that's just part of being a human nature, right? Being a good person. But their work is to do their work. In others, and this is where you need to make sure you understand your expectations under an RA, maybe that the professor has a grant that the research assistantship is funding to do the data that needs to be gathered on the grant, and your dissertation subject is very different than the grant. So you benefited by having an assistantship that came in and said, okay, we're going to hire you to do this work, but that work isn't the same as your dissertation work. So you'll have to do this work that they need to meet the obligations of the grant that you're being paid on, and if we were to be audited, we got to make sure you're doing the work that matches where your pay is coming from if the federal government were to come and audit that grant. But you may have then your dissertation work separate. So again, it varies by department. So you've got to figure out what are the expectations in your department, in your discipline, with your who's ever hiring you, of what those expectations are. Ask early on if you don't know. You got to get that clarified so you know what you're working on and what you're going. And some students work on multiple projects for those 20 hours plus, right? They're working on all of this. So I can't tell you a model because it varies with every individual and everything. So some final words here, and then we'll get to some questions. Your role as a student researcher. I think this is probably more important than anything as an employee, is to find purpose in your work. You picked a discipline because you had some passion for it, right? Hopefully that passion remains throughout your time working on it. But sometimes you get into it and you're like, this is not at all what I liked. This is not what I thought I wanted to do, and that's okay. There are opportunities to switch, or you can use that information for your next degree on what you go into. I switched. I was one of those that I got into an area that I started my master's on, and I realized, man, there's this other organism I want to work on, and it wasn't in that department. And so I switched. It was the best thing I learned because I didn't know that that discipline was available to me when I applied to grad school. So I'm an entomologist. I was going to be Jane Goodall. I was going to work with, major primates. So I was studying animal behavior, and when I was studying the animals, I realized that they had botflies that had laid their eggs on the animals, and I didn't know what those were. And I went and I talked to a professor. I said, what's this thing that's got this sore on their back and all that? And he said, oh, that's a botfly. Would you like to learn about entomology? Why don't you take an entomology course? And I said, oh, okay, I need an elective. Okay, I took it. And I'm like, man, these are cool. And then I took another one, and I'm like, they're much easier to work than primates, and no one cares if you kill them, because I really did if you killed a primate, and all the regulations I had to go through to get permission to work on vertebrates. I didn't have to with invertebrates, because nobody cares if you kill bugs, right? And so I found a career during my graduate work that I didn't even know that I could eventually go into. So you may discover that too, and that's okay, right? You can use all the skills that I learned as a mammologist, I used as an insect behaviorist. It's just the organism that's different. But the theories are all the same, and the data analysis is all the same, and The fact that I can sit and study something moving around for hours at end and just watch what it's doing, that's an innate thing in me that made it work for me to be a behaviorist, right? And so you may discover that too. So if you find purpose in your work, the hormonal change that happens when you start talking about your work will make you feel amazing. And then you'll know why you're here, and when it gets hard and the hours are long and the experiments are failing, you're like, there's a greater purpose out here on why I'm studying this. And for me to be able to talk to me, my smiles go up, my energy level goes up when I get to talk to people about the work that I do as an entomologist. Like, let me tell you about this neat experiment. Let me tell you what my students doing. Oh man, look what we're figuring out. This is so cool. We're the first ones to know this about anybody. Nobody else in the world knew this until we did this, right? And that energy that you get, that's the best part of being a grad student, is that you're studying things at a really intense level. And when you find passion in that work and your research, oh my God, it's amazing. It's just, you know, it will give you that energy to get through. So find that passion in your work. Commit fully to what you're doing. Graduate school is not easy. It's hard. We've said this many times today. You'll hear it throughout. But once you commit to it and you find that passion, you're going to love it. Most of you will find that this is a purpose of why you came in. If it isn't, it's okay. You'll find other purpose of what you need to do in your life, right? But commit fully to it. Don't go into it half blank, right? Go into it and fully commit to what you're doing. Expand your skills. This is a critical one as a researcher, as a grad student, and as an employee. Everything you do, you should think about the purpose of how I'm going to take this thing that I'm doing and put it in my toolbox. A skill that you're learning, a technique that you're learning, an analysis that you're learning, improving your writing, improving your speaking ability, all of that is what you want to add to those skills that you have. And write them down, because sometimes we forget all the little things that we're learning. Keep a piece of paper there that says, here's all my skills that I'm figuring out. And add to that. And that's why I say when I switched degrees, there was nothing lost, because every single one of those skills commits to the next thing that you're doing. And even as I went into entomology, I studied insect mating behavior. And then I went in to study molecular study of why insects migrate. And I studied insects migrating from Mexico across the Gulf of Mexico, and I get to go spend time on oil rigs to see what their physiological change that were happening as those insects flew across these massive water masses. And then I studied insects on how they move up into the cloud system when storm fronts come. Right? And then I went on a postdoc and I studied tropical ecology, and I went down into the tropics and I studied an endangered species on an endangered tree and how these two interact and how I can save the endangered insect and the endangered tree that I was working on, lignivite. And then I worked on vegetable crops where I studied insect movements. I would crawl around on my belly marking. I would paint thousands of insects and release them in a field, and at night I would go follow them. Right? That's the behaviorist in me. And so I studied vegetable crops. And then I got a job. My next postdoc, while I was waiting to get a faculty job, was working as an entomologist and an animal behaviorist, because I worked as a surgical nurse to get through undergraduate. I had a mammalogy background in wildlife ecology, and I got hired by the federal government to set up a lab that looked at two things. Coolest job ever. I studied where insects, biocontrol, bringing insects in from China that feeds on aquatic weeds to keep waterways open so that they're navigable in the U.S. So the weeds grow into these channels, and then you can't navigate boats down through it. So I was a scuba diver. See, take a passion. I took my scuba diving background, and I would go and capture insects in China. We'd bring them here. We raised them in a lab. I would release them on cages, and then I would scuba dive underneath to see how the insects were feeding on the plant, right? And then the other half of the job, I'd get into a helicopter and fly to another state, and I worked on wild animal ticks and Lyme disease and collecting the insect organism that was causing Lyme disease and looking at the molecular markers for that. Now, none of that I did in my graduate work, right? But I switched systems, and I switched organisms, and I switched types of job. And every single one pulled on the jobs that I had had before and the skills. And then the first day on the job at that government job, I got the call for an interview at Purdue, which was my dream job, was to get a faculty position. And so I interviewed and I got the job. So I only stayed in the federal government job with my dual, getting to fly back and forth with my dogs in a helicopter and ride in airboats. I only got to do that for a year. And then I came to Purdue as a faculty member. And the job that I had as Purdue was in none of the areas that I had any of my degrees in, or any of the experiments. I wasn't working in tropical ecology anymore. I wasn't working in aqua weed biocontrol. I'm working in food insect systems, where I protect food, forensic science, and dead bodies. So I work between dead bodies and food systems so that you have clean food without insects in it around the world. So none of that stuff had anything to do with any of those degrees, but everything I learned a skill and I applied it to something. So that's my word to you, is to expand your skills. You never know what the job market can be, and you don't have to train for a specific job. You bring skills with you that you apply to any problem. And that's what you should be learning in graduate school. That's the differentiation between undergrad and grad. We already talked about this. You're going to fail. Now, in my imposter syndrome talk, I talk about the fact that I failed physics in college. I failed chemistry in college. And after I failed those first two and I went into my undergraduate world, I really shook my world, because I'm like, how am I going to be a scientist, which is what I thought I wanted to be, if I can't pass physics and I can't pass chemistry? Well, I went to an experimental high school, which is a whole other story we could talk about at a coffee hour. And I never had those classes in high school. So once I reset my expectations and reset the coursework, I went in and I got a minor in chemistry. I finally figured out biochemistry and organic chemistry and pea chemistry and all that, and I did it. I still don't quite understand physics. But physics graduate students are getting me attuned to what physics is. Anyway, you fail, and you can go beyond it. You're smart. You'll figure out what you need to do to correct your failures, and you go forward, okay? And last one is, when we get under stress, we tend to want to cut corners. And you can't do that in graduate school. The hardest thing I have to do as the dean of the graduate school is to take away someone's degree that was awarded, and then we find either plagiarism or unethical data treatment, and they're in a faculty position and I take away their PhD. And now they've lost their job and they've lost their doctorate. You do not want that to happen. Do not, under any pressure, if something does not seem right, don't do it. Make sure you double check, and late at night when we're writing, we're often copying and pasting and bringing things in, and then we don't clean up the document. You don't want to get caught in that situation where it goes through. We have plagiarism checkers, easiest thing to catch. And all your dissertations will have to go through a plagiarism checker, and your major professor has to sign off on it. But any draft of anything you write, you can ask them. It has to go through a faculty member, but they can run it through. It's called Authenticate. And it goes into every database that's out there. It was written by a Purdue individual. It goes into every database that's out there, even behind journals' firewalls, to be able to find the stuff that's in there. And then we can duplicate it. We'll match up every source that it finds those words in it. And the reason we say it's not a plagiarism checker, in that plagiarism means that you directly copied some things, right? But there are only so many ways to say things. Like, I can only say that the insect emerged from the egg. From there, an egg emerges a larva insect, right? There's only about maybe 5 or 6 ways you can say that. So that's not plagiarism, right? Statistical. So there's only so many ways we state how we write about statistics. So we make sure you get with your people who are in that discipline who can say, oh, that's how we all say it. That's not plagiarism, that's not plagiarism, that's not plagiarism. Ah, this one, those 3 or 4 sentences, that's plagiarism. We need to change that. So practice that. Make sure that you're ethical and responsible. And the last hint on this is to use your strengths to serve others. Every one of you comes with a very unique strength. Some of you will be amazing writers. I hate writing. I really do. But it's part of the job. My best advice for writing, verbally vomit on a page. Just dump it all out there, and then you can go back and edit it. But just get it out there. Some people are amazing editors. Some people are amazing illustrators and working with graphs to get, how you visualize data. Some people are amazing statisticians. Each one of you has a unique skill. Find out what other people in your department's skills are and use them. I will tell you, your faculty do. When I came in as a faculty member, I'm not perfect at everything. And I found out who were the best editors, who were the best, I could go and do experimental methods with, who were the people that I could get help with, statistics if I wanted to try a new statistical course. And if you're not good in statistics, Purdue has a statistic consulting. Do we have any statistic majors here? Well, I'll tell you, there's a unit here, you can use free statistical help. There's statistical grad students, and they will sit down with you and your data and your experimental design and design it all out for you and give you, the leading edge on what you need to do. They're amazing, and you don't have to pay for it. So everybody's got skills. Find out what each other's skills are and use each other. Can you help me do this? Can you help me transition this? Can you help me design this? Can you help me whatever? Because you'll help each other. So the challenges you'll face as a student are many. I can't go into it all. Let's talk. Come to my coffee hours. We'll talk on that. Here's my advice. You're expected to come up with a plan of study for your coursework. Master's students are expected to do it within 1 to 2 semesters. PhDs are expected to do it 2 to 3. This is your contract with the university on what coursework you need to take to graduate. Different for every program. Once you get that signed off, it goes through all your major professor, it goes through your head of your grad chair, it goes through your department, it comes to the grad school, and we approve it. That's your contract to graduate. When you go to graduate, we're going to match your transcripts to that plan of study, and it needs to match. If you delay filling that out, you know what happens? You're going to pay a late graduation fee because we can't do an audit on that. So get it done before you get, and if you're a master's, you want to get it done because you got to have it, it's got to be filed and complete and signed off before the semester that you graduate. Or there's a $200 late graduation fee because now we got to run through all of that and do your audit late to certify that you're going to graduate. Find mentors, as many as you can. Not one person, especially your PI, can serve as everything to you. I'm going to say, not your PI can serve everything that you need to get out of here. Find as many mentors as you can in your discipline, outside your discipline, outside the university, within the university, whatever it might be. You need a team of people around you who will provide you with advice that you can then hear from multiple perspectives and match what matches you. Because if you just talk to one person, you're going to get one perspective. And each one of you are unique, you come with unique skills, and your pathway forward is unique. So I want you to make sure you get the best advice that you can with as many people as you can, and then filter it for you. Because you might get some bad advice. And you need to make sure that you get the advice that is appropriate for your personality, your skills, your goals, and where you want to go. All right? My other hint on that, and we talk about this in my next talk on imposter syndrome and stuff, is do not go to someone and walk up to them and say, will you be my mentor? It's so awkward. It really is an awkward conversation. Because immediately the person that you're asking thinking, oh my God, Why do they want me to be a mentor? What skills do they think I have? I am so busy. I'm trying to work on this grant, or I'm trying to do this. How can I be their mentor? What do they expect out of this? What do they define by a mentor? What do they want? And so I never put labels on that, right? If there are people that you respect and you want to know something, go to them and say, listen, do you have I'd like 15, 20 minutes to talk to you. I have a quick question on this. And you go talk to them. And maybe you come up with another question, or maybe that conversation leads to another one. You go back and you think, and you're like, I'd like to talk to them again. Eventually, you build a mentoring relationship because both of you find something mutual in that, and you feel comfort. You connect with that person. You see that person sees you as you are, and is giving you advice that you connect with. And so you do that multiple times with multiple people. Then maybe it ends after 5 or 6 meetings because you got everything that you need because that person was a great teacher and you wanted to know 5 teaching skills and you got that out of them. And then you go on to something else. By defining a mentor, then how do you end a mentoring relationship? We tell this to new faculty. If you have to spend a lot of time managing your mentors because they're getting mad because you're not following their advice, then you can't get out of the relationship. But if you never label the relationship, there's nothing to get out of. You just went and talked to them, and now I'm done talking to you. And I don't have any more coffee with you because I don't like what you're telling me, right? Or I don't like you as a person, or I don't connect personally with you. I just feel awkward every time I talk with you. And so then you can just let it end and you can go find somebody else. But find multiple people here that can help you, whatever your career goals are. Stretch your boundaries. Try something you've never tried before. It's okay to fail, but try something. When I was in grad school, as I said earlier, I got my Taekwondo, I got a black belt. Try something different. You never know what you might do. Don't think of it as a job. Maybe you can work it to 8 to 5. We have many grad students that are very good at really focusing their time and getting things done 8 to 5. Some not. I'm not an 8 to 5er. I'm a kind of mid-morning, then I walk campus. You'll see me every day. Take an hour and I walk around campus and talk to people. And then I come back and I'm really focused again. And then I deal with my kids. And then, I read before I go to bed or whatever. So I don't think of it as a job. It's a career. I think of it as a profession and how I'm training myself for a profession, not a job. And work with determination. Work like this means something to you. And that's why I said find the passion, because when you work with determination, you'll make progress. Okay? This is something, if you haven't lived up north, you can grab anything and slide down a hill in it. Cafeteria trays, they stopped putting those in the cafeterias because they kept disappearing every snowstorm. And people would go, this is a place called Slater Hill, outside of campus on the west side, where everybody goes sledding, from mattresses to, I don't know, they find everything to slide down on. Anyway, snow days, fine time to go out and play. As I saw, if you went to the resource fair, there's tons of parks, amazing walking trails, biking. There's a huge biking groups. There's a lot of club activities, sports that you can get involved in, something to de-stress. But anyway, take advantage. When I moved every year growing up, so I never went to the same school twice as a kid. And we lived up north, but we never lived in the winter part of up north much. And so when I moved here, I moved from the Florida Keys up here. And so when I came up in November, there was like this white stuff hitting my windshield. And it wasn't sand that I'm used to having. It was like the snowy stuff, right? Someone said, do not confine yourself if you've never lived indoors like all winter long. I went out and I rented a pair of cross-country skis, and you can cross-country ski on all the golf courses. And it was amazing. I figured out winter sports. I'm not good at it, I will tell you. But it gets me out, and I can breathe the clean air, and I just refresh. So anyway, find ways to deal with that. And lastly, be the best you. I don't know what you best is, but be the best whoever you are, and you will shine, and people will pick that up. Okay? So I'm going to end here. Are there any questions? I have some time before we start the next talk, if you have some questions. You don't have to House lights? Things that you're curious about? If not, yes, way in the back, and you're going to have to shout because they don't have you guys mic'd, or come up and you. It depends which policy you pick. So there's grad staff, there's international, and there's grad student. Make sure you sign up for the right one. But it covers all of, I would say most policies cover most of basic. You can also add, some of them you have to add dental, vision, some are included. It depends on which policy, okay?